Ce que je voudrais dire sur Mosque quand même, parce que je comprenais pas. Sur le plan méthodologique, j'ai beaucoup de mal en ce moment. Vraiment, j'ai essayé de réfléchir avant de venir. C'est-à-dire aux tendances générales du monde. Et je me disais, mais j'ai jamais eu autant de mal à comprendre ce qui se passe. Et j'ai compris pourquoi je ne comprenais pas. C'est qu'en fait, ce qui se passe de définitif et de solide, c'est la victoire russe à l'Est. On est en train de subir une défaite. Le camp occidental est en train de subir une défaite. Et on est en cours de dislocation.
The enemy is advancing. Enemy assault groups are now regularly entering Virovi. There are contact battles. Fighting is taking place in Peshani, and the enemy has already established itself in Peshani. These are small settlements, but this is already the neighborhood of Pokrovsk. Virovi is practically already Pokrovsk, right next to the neighborhood, and a very dangerous situation is the enemy's event in Kotline. Kotline is an important road, and Kotline actually allows the enemy to enter the city of Pokrovsk. These directions, the so-called grey zone, where the enemy enters, are actually 4 kilometers from the Dnipro-Pokrovsk highway. That is, the main highways of communication to Pokrovsk supply. There are now battles in Kotline. We are forced to counterattack because, unfortunately, there is no line of defense there that could be held. In fact, the enemy is moving in this direction. These were the opening words of the latest report from Ukrainian journalists about the Pokrovsk sector. In fact, Yuri Butusov, who is the author of this article, is of the opinion that the Ukrainian command has become so inept in terms of the management of the defenses and brigades around Pokrovsk that he believes that the fate of the city is already sealed. Meanwhile, further up north, according to Russian media RIA Novosti, Russian troops liberated 801 square kilometers, or 63.2% of the territory originally occupied by Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region. The offensive of Russian troops is underway in all directions. The enemy suffers significant losses and retreats from the occupied territories, despite the transfer of additional reserves. 63.2%, or 801 square miles, were liberated from the territory of the Kursk region initially occupied by the enemy, which amounted to 1,268 square miles. That is what the latest report from the Ministry of Defense says. The West sent Ukrainians to death for a fruitless attempt to destroy Russia, wrote columnists of the Norwegian website Stegan. In quotations, the interests of the Ukrainian people have never been a priority for the West. The country and its people became victims of the West's fruitless attempt to destroy Russia, the material says. In addition, the pressure of the Allies on Kiev in order to lower the age of conscription in Ukraine to 18 years only emphasizes all the nightmarish inhumanity of the policy of Western countries, the publication noted. This indirect war could have been avoided in principle, and if no one had intervened, it would have ended with a peace agreement in the spring of 2022. But the West had other plans. He wanted to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian, the authors of the article complained. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service reported that Kiev has already prepared a decision to lower the mobilization age to 18 years at the urgent request of Washington. The document will be adopted in the near future, the department added. Meanwhile, in Japanese media platforms, they admit that Russia is in an extremely advantageous position to conclude a truce in the Ukrainian conflict. This was written by the Japanese edition Daily Shincho. In quotations, we should not wait for the fall of the Russian government due to the ongoing SMO. The analysis shows that the economy will remain stable over the next year. Now, Moscow is in an extremely advantageous position to conclude a truce, the material says. In addition, observers admitted that the Moscow regime has a close probability of winning the conflict. In quotations again, it is a pity, but Kiev has no other way out but to stop hostilities as soon as possible, the article emphasized. Against the background of Ukraine's actual economic bankruptcy, its defeats at the front, and its partners' fatigue from the need to endlessly finance Kiev in the West and within the country, they increasingly begin to talk about the need to start the peace process. Zelensky, who forbade dialogue with Russia at the legislative level, said that negotiations are possible provided that Ukraine is supported by third countries. In addition, Kiev's demand to return to the borders of 1991 became less and less common. Then there is another report from Russian media based on interviews with captured Ukrainian soldiers. Tyhey, Tyhey, claims that the Kiev regime burns the bodies of servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine in order not to pay their families. A captured Ukrainian border guard told the Russian security forces. A video of his words is available to RIA Novosti, Russian media. According to him, the death toll is so high that even in Kharkiv, there is not enough opportunities for a local crematorium, so mobile cremation plants were brought to the city. On Christmas Eve, a group of 6 employees of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine surrendered on the border with the Belgorod region in the Kharkiv direction, a source in Russian law enforcement agencies told RIA Novosti earlier. Among the prisoners was Private Ivan Kutz, born in 1996, Inspector of the Border Service of the 2nd category. In quotations, a lot of wounded, even more killed. The stationary crematorium in Kharkiv can't cope, so they drove mobile ones. They burned corpses in order not to pay payments to the families of the victims, Kutz said. They also burned foreign mercenaries to hide the presence of their contingent in Ukraine, he added. So this was just a summary of some of the more interesting stories coming out from various media sources that you would not see printed in the Western media. And this is exactly what I like to bring to my viewers of the WIPS channel. However, the focus on this video is on Pokrovsk, where I have 2 interesting news sources about what's really going on the defense of the Pokrovsk area for the Ukrainian armed forces. One from the famous Ukrainian journalist Yuri Butusov, and another one from Ukrainian media. But this is less of a frontline report, as you can get that from my last video. Unfortunately, my channel got hit recently with a community guidelines warning due to some of the footage I try to post in the videos. So, to avoid any worse consequences, I am censoring all footage in the public videos. However, the uncensored and often graphic versions of these combat footages are available to channel memberships in the brutal combat footage tier. I suggest everyone click the video in the end screen to get a trailer of what to expect when you gain access, such as uncensored combat footage, exclusive analysis, and other unseen video clips from world leaders of present and now recent, historically. It is also a very good way to help support my independent research. Lastly, there is a limited time 15% discount on all items at the merch store. This discount ends on January 20th, and the members have been notified of this since the 15th of January. Another perk for channel membership. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get into it. The defense is not stabilized, was how Mr. Butusov decided to describe the situation at Pokrovsk. This entire gray zone is a zone where the Russians simply conduct counter battles on some separate open positions or on empty landings. There are no defense lines. There are no lines of defense that would be occupied by our troops, where the main firearms would be fired. The Russians understand that our defenses are unstable in this direction, and therefore they throw in their reinforcements. And what about the armed forces of Ukraine? Unfortunately, the commander of the Donetsk OTA, General Tarnavsky, cannot influence the chaos that is taking place in any way. They removed Lutsenko's former commander, hoping that there would be some improvement, flexibility, and adequacy. Unfortunately, this does not occur. Tarnavsky has become just a general watchman who thinks his task is to yell at commanders, threaten, give orders. That is, instead of allowing commanders to build defense lines, plan time, use real troops, whether they are able to carry out this order, ensure the interaction of drones and electronic warfare. Mr. Tarnavsky does not do this at all. I understand he is in a critical situation. He receives many orders, instructions, demands, shouts from General Natov and Syrsky. But this is a situation where the commander must be able to say no to his managers. Tarnavsky is not the person who says no. Tarnavsky always says, there is, yes, for sure. Unfortunately, Syrskyi has already filmed a significant number of commanders, brigades and battalions in the direction who had the courage to defend their position. And now, there are a lot of officers who say, yes, that's right. We see the results of their leadership as Syrskyi, Natov and Tarnavsky, together with their subordinates. We may get the impression that the enemy has an incredible advantage here and cannot be stopped. I myself communicate with many commanders, with fighters at all levels, who are directly conducting combat operations. None of them say that the enemy cannot be stopped. There are quite a few of our Ukrainian troops there, quite a few. There is ammunition there. What is not in the direction of Pokrovsk and Leningrad, you may ask? Adequate task setting that would correspond to the capabilities of the troops. I repeat, there are no defensive lines that were prepared, occupied by the Ukrainian troops at least a couple of days before the Russians got there. There is no adequate control and use of electronic warfare and drones that is centralized. Some of our well-known units are in this direction. For example, units of the Magyar Bird Brigade. Unfortunately, Magyar does not manage the use of drones in the strip, does not control the use of electronic warfare. Neither the Magyar or Lazar battalions also works there. They could build it, but unfortunately, there is no such management organized by high-tech weapons there. Here in general, there is a problem with coordination. A large number of units, a large number of chiefs, all in manual mode. Each general wants to steer a platoon, wants to show at which point in the landing you need to sit, somewhere far from the headquarters. And this is such a complete madness. I wrote about the fact that in this direction, we need a person who has authority, can inspire troops. In fact, I wrote that General Mikhailo Drapati is needed in this direction, who has already participated in the stabilization of the situation in 2024 near Kharkiv and in the Luhansk OTU. I want to say yes to the objectivity of the Council, but the armed forces have several more leaders, commanders, generals, colonels who would be absolutely worthy to lead here, but unfortunately, I cannot admit that. But why do I advocate for General Drapati, you may ask? Well, first of all, because Drapati already has a certain gravitas. He was appointed commander of the ground forces. He now has the greatest weight among adequate commanders, and of course, he should not be kept in Kiev in his current position, which is exclusively administrative. Instead, he should be similar to Alexander Syrskyi near the front. This is the only appropriate solution. That is, to appoint a commander who has the gravitas, the influence, and who will be forced to listen, both below and above, because he has his own authority. It should not be that because he has 30 years of service, he should just be sitting in a chair near Kiev. Because the reality is, according to Mr. Butusov, that the attempts of General Syrskyi, Natov, and Tarnavsky are simply futile. They cannot change the situation. Here, reserves are introduced to the direction of Pokrovsk. 2 brigades were sent to the city, the 32nd and the 155th. And for those of you who are true followers of this channel, you will know about my recent video I made about this very said 155th Mechanized Brigade in the Pokrovsk sector that succumbed to a complete debacle and devastation. It was my most popular video on this channel, gaining up to 99,000 views. You can get it in the end screen. We see that even the insertion of fresh forces, numbering almost 10,000 people, still does not change the situation in Pokrovsk. That is, it is not a problem of the number of troops, it is a problem of the adequacy of the management. There is a chaos in the management, Mr. Butusov writes. Even drones and electronic warfare cannot be built. Counterfights are continuous, but there is unorganized fire damage. This is all understood in the Pokrovsk direction by every company commander. I am not saying anything special in this article. I want to say, if there are no changes in management, we will lose Leningrad and Pokrovsk, and it will be fast. So it is now critical. Pokrovsk and Leningrad is the last agglomeration that protects the Dnipro region. Pavlohrad from Pokrovsk is only 110 kilometers away. It is already central Ukraine, an important industrial center. The situation is not just critical, it is uncontrollable. Our assault units in this direction are not conducting targeted assault actions. They bear heavy losses during search and strike actions. That is, the command has lost control over some area, and combat-ready units are sent there to find out how far the enemy has gone with the orders of if you find it, just kill it. It is a complete lack of planning. Instead of building a defense and simply methodically killing the Russian enemy, conducting counterattacks on specific objects on a specific enemy, we are simply conducting search actions and counter battle, and the enemy is attacking relentlessly. As soon as the Russians strike and search for routes with their drones, wherever they go, they send new people there. They could all be killed, but this requires planning, reconnaissance, and the interaction of the force of means. But someone has to build it, and the capacity is just not there. The commanders were changed. The 155th was changed. The 32nd Brigade was changed. But there's just chaos in the management. Now, the remainder of this report is more or less a repetition of what I've just read, so I won't read it, save for these last two paragraphs where Mr. Butusov directs his message to the Ukrainian reader. You and I have one opportunity, he says. Since Vladimir Zelensky, Alexander Syrsky, and Rustem Umerov, the Minister of Defense, who is absent from the war and in no way affects what is happening at the front, they react only to publicity. If there are many views, if there are many reposts, likes, that is only when they will pay attention to the fact that they need to react. If the situation is bad and everyone remains silent, they believe that the people support their actions. During this stream, I specifically want to say that Zelensky, Umerov, and Syrsky are showing criminal negligence and inaction, failing month after month measures to defend Pokrovsk and Leningrad. This is negligence that leads to serious consequences. I hope that it will have enough resonance for them to start at least doing something, paying attention to the need for planned actions in general. I don't know how else to reach. Information is transmitted through all channels. There are no solutions. Until some high-profile scandal is arranged in our government, it does not act on anything at all. Now lastly, as a form of corroboration of the complaints that Mr. Butusov has just made, here is a brief report from Ukrainian media, RBC Ukraine, about the situation on the Pokrovsk front. RBC Ukraine reports that brigades unprepared for combat operation are placed to defend the areas with great responsibility, and as a result, they lose positions. This was stated in an interview with NV by the commander of the 108th Separate Battalion of the Da Vinci Wolf, Captain Sergei Filimonov. Earlier, Filimonov stated that, in quotations, the cause of the disaster in the Pokrovsk direction is the higher command. As for the unrealistic tasks I was talking about, first of all, I meant the newly created Green Brigades, which are put on the strip with great responsibility, then they lose positions. And because of this, the general situation at the front suffers, and specifically our unit, our brigade, he said. Filimonov noted that the effectiveness of newly created brigades is not determined by the date of creation. In quotations, there are certain points on which we can assess the ineffective newly created brigade. An ineffective newly created brigade is formed from reserve officers, formed from officers who have shown themselves poorly in former combat positions. In fact, the 155th Brigade, unfortunately, is not an isolated case. There are almost 10 such brigades, and these are the ones I met at the front, who stood next to me. In fact, there are a lot of them, the commander explained. According to Filimonov, the newly created brigades have no understanding of the organization of combat work at all, or they have only individual combat commanders who can somehow manage the battle. In quotations. And in fact, these are brigades, 3,000 to 5,000 people, among whom there are no specialists in artillerymen, RVP, tanker, mechanic. They are all infantry, from clerks to sappers and scouts. That is, they are not even taught in the profession. If we are talking about replacement of the front and the staffing of brigades, all the same people, only unprepared, unsecured, unqualified, and low motivated, will also staff the old brigades that will be standing there. Also, they will not change the old brigade that will go to rotation. No one will go to rotation, he added. Filimonov noted that the newly created brigades still become part of the old brigades, or rather, an ineffective part. I'm sorry, I may say it wrong, but I will tell you how it is. They become meat, in fact, he said. The commander also noted that Ukraine still has a lot of forces. And for this, it is definitely not necessary to reduce the age of conscription to 18 years. If we create conditions in the army in which it will be possible to fight, be effective, and prepare cool, I guarantee you that many guys 18, 19, 20, and 21 years old will go to the front on their own. There are people, there are a lot of people, there is equipment, there is a lot of equipment, there is weapons, there are also a lot of them. We, I mean the higher command, need to make a normal analytical department that can describe the problem normally and correctly. The problem of distribution, preparation, management of people, he added.
Бронебойный заряжай.
Бронебойный.
Заряжай. АЗР электроспуск.
АЗР электроспуск нажал.
В залоповом уперся и выстрел.
Вот так ты?
Да, глазом, в бомб, а не глазом. Выстрел! Выстрел!